March 21, 2024. The United States Capitol. 3 men, each over 100 years old, sit in wheelchairs as Speaker Mike Johnson approaches with a gleaming gold medal. Bernard Bluestein, 100, Seymour Nussenbaum, 100, John Chrisman, 99. Behind them, photographs of 1,097 other soldiers. Most are dead now. For 50 years, none of them could tell their families what they did in World War II. Not their wives, not their children, not even each other, after the war ended. The medal citation reads, "In recognition of their unique and highly distinguished service in conducting deception operations in Europe during World War II." Deception operations? The words don't capture it. Between June 1944 and July 1945, these men performed 20 battlefield illusions across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. They impersonated entire divisions. They made the German army shoot at ghosts. And according to military historians, they saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives. Their secret? Inflatable tanks that cost $85 each. Loudspeakers playing recorded sounds, actors in generals' uniforms, and an absolute commitment to a lie so convincing that German intelligence never suspected the truth. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the Ghost Army, declassified May 22, 1996, after being buried in National Archives Record Group 407 for 51 years. This is how 100 artists, designers, and sound engineers became the most successful con men in military history. June 6, 1944, D-Day. 156,000 Allied soldiers storm 5 beaches in Normandy, France. Within a month, more than 850,000 troops pour into France, establishing a foothold in occupied Europe. But the Wehrmacht, Germany's army, is not defeated. They're dug in. And Adolf Hitler has 58 divisions stationed in France, with more arriving daily from the Eastern Front. The Allied problem is mathematical. Every mile of advance requires overwhelming force. To take a German position, Allied doctrine demands a 3-to-1 advantage in troops, sometimes 5-to-1. But there aren't enough American soldiers, not enough British, not enough Canadians. The manpower simply doesn't exist to be everywhere at once. In overwhelming numbers across a 400-mile front, General Omar Bradley, commanding the U.S. First Army, faces an impossible choice. Concentrate forces for a breakthrough, and the flanks remain vulnerable. Spread forces evenly, and nowhere has enough strength to break German lines. He needs to be in 2 places at once. He needs phantom divisions. The Americans weren't the first to face this problem. In October 1942, before the Battle of El Alamein in North Africa, British forces under General Bernard Montgomery needed to convince German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel that the main attack would come from the south. The actual assault would strike from the north. A British officer named Dudley Clark created what became known as a force, a deception unit. They built 2,000 dummy tanks from wood, canvas, and paint. They positioned them in the southern desert, where German reconnaissance planes would photograph them. At night, British engineers moved real tanks north, replacing them with more dummies in the south. The deception worked. Rommel kept 2 panzer divisions in the wrong position. Montgomery broke through in the north. The Africa Corps retreated 1,500 miles. When American officers Ralph Ingersoll and Billy Harris reviewed after-action reports from El Alamein in late 1943, they understood the potential. Deception wasn't a sideshow. It was a force multiplier. If the British could fool Rommel with wood and paint, Americans could do the same in Europe. But they would need specialists, artists who understood perspective and illusion, sound engineers who could manipulate acoustics, radio operators who could fake an entire division's communications traffic. On January 20, 1944, the U.S. Army activated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops at Camp Forest, Tennessee. The official designation was mundane. The mission was anything but Colonel Harry Reeder took command of 100 men divided into 4 specialized units: the 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion, 379 men, artists, designers, architects, recruited from art schools across America. Their job: build inflatable tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, and aircraft that looked real from 500 yards. The 31 Signal Service Company, special 296 men, sound engineers and technicians. Their mission: record the sounds of armored divisions and replay them through loudspeakers to simulate troop movements at night. Company A, 293rd Engineer Combat Battalion, 168 men, combat engineers. They provided security and handled the physical labor of moving equipment. Signal Company Special, 257 men, radio operators. They would broadcast fake communications to create the electronic signature of entire divisions. The Ghost Army trained for 4 months. Then, in May 1944, they boarded ships for England, arriving 2 weeks before D-Day. Their equipment manifests listed items that didn't officially exist: 79 inflatable M4 Sherman tanks, 58 inflatable 105mm howitzers, 93 inflatable 2.5-ton trucks, 11 inflatable reconnaissance vehicles, 500 pounds of pressurized air canisters, 2 500-watt loudspeaker arrays mounted on armored half-tracks, 350 hours of recorded tank sounds, recorded at Fort Knox. Total cost of inflatable equipment, $6,090, about $110,000 in 2024 dollars. A single real Sherman tank cost $50,000 in 1944, equivalent to $875,000 today. The deception was ready. Now they needed a battlefield. Bernard Bluestein was 20 years old when he enlisted in 1943. Before the war, he'd been studying commercial art in Chicago. He wanted to design advertisements, maybe work for an agency on Michigan Avenue. Instead, a recruiting officer at Fort Sheridan, Illinois, looked at his portfolio and said, "We have something special for you." Bluestein didn't know what special meant until he arrived at Camp Forest and saw the equipment. "They showed us these rubber tanks," he recalled in a 2013 oral history for the Ghost Army Legacy Project. "I thought it was a joke. I said, 'You want us to fight the Germans with balloons?' The officer said, 'No, Private. We want you to make the Germans think there are tanks where there aren't any.'" The 603rd Camouflage Battalion recruited heavily from art schools: Parsons School of Design in New York, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, Pratt Institute, the Corcoran School in Washington, D.C. Men who'd been studying Cézanne and Cubism 6 months earlier were now learning the physics of visual deception. Ellsworth Kelly, who would become one of America's most celebrated abstract painters, served in the 603rd. So did fashion designer Bill Blass, artist Art Kane, who later photographed jazz legends for Esquire. These weren't soldiers who happened to know art. They were artists who'd been drafted and then recruited into something unprecedented. An inflatable Sherman tank weighed 65 pounds. 4 men could carry one. Fully inflated, it measured 20 feet long, 9 feet wide, and 9 feet tall, identical in external dimensions to a real M4 Sherman, which weighed 33 tons. The material was rubberized canvas, reinforced with internal support struts. Inflation took 4 minutes using a standard air compressor. The process was surprisingly loud, a wheezing, mechanical sound that could be heard 100 yards away. That meant inflation happened only during daylight hours when German observers weren't listening. At night, the tank sat silent and motionless, already inflated. The visual deception depended on distance. From 500 yards, the typical distance of German reconnaissance, the inflatables looked real. Shadows fell correctly. Proportions matched. The Ghost Army artists even added weathering details, mud splashes on the treads, exhaust stains on the rear panels, tactical markings that matched real units. But up close, the illusion failed. The rubber had a distinct sheen. The tracks didn't sink into soft ground the way 33 tons of steel would. Wind made the turrets sway slightly. That meant the Ghost Army always operated behind front lines, in areas German ground troops couldn't reach. They positioned their fakes 2 to 5 miles behind real combat units, where Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes would photograph them, and German spotters would see them through binoculars. The inflatables had another critical advantage: mobility. A real Sherman tank required a tank transporter or traveled at 25 miles per hour on roads, burning gallons of fuel. An inflatable Sherman deflated to the size of a duffel bag and fit into a 2.5-ton truck. The Ghost Army could set up an entire fake armored division in 6 hours, then disappear overnight and reappear 50 miles away the next day. The 3132nd Signal Service Company specialized in something even stranger: sonic deception. Their equipment was classified as Project Number 8, QMC, a bureaucratic designation that hid the truth. They had recorded the sounds of war. In the winter of 1943-44, Army engineers traveled to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where the 2nd Armored Division was training. They set up microphones and recorded everything: tanks starting their engines, tanks driving on gravel roads, tanks crossing wooden bridges, half-tracks moving in convoy. They recorded the specific acoustic signature of a Sherman tank shifting gears, the rattle of ammunition boxes being loaded, the hydraulic whine of a 105mm howitzer being adjusted for elevation. Those recordings were pressed onto phonographic discs, the same technology used for music records, and then loaded onto 2 armored half-tracks, each equipped with massive 500-watt speakers. On a quiet night, the speakers could project sound up to 15 miles. Sergeant Albert Albrecht operated one of the sonic half-tracks. In an interview recorded in 2018, 2 years before his death, he described the process. "We'd wait until after midnight when the real combat sounds died down. Then we'd drive to a position maybe 3 miles behind our lines, close to the German positions but not too close. We'd start the recordings, tank engines, trucks, voices. We'd play them for 6-7 hours straight. The Germans would hear what sounded like an entire armored division moving into position for an attack at dawn. Meanwhile, the real attack was happening 20 miles away. The sonic deceptions were psychologically devastating. German soldiers in foxholes would hear hundreds of tanks approaching in the darkness. They'd call for artillery support. They'd request reinforcements, all to counter an army that didn't exist. The Signal Company Special handled the electronic deception. Every American division had a distinct radio signature, the pattern of messages, the frequencies used, the call signs of commanders. German signals intelligence monitored these patterns constantly, using radio direction-finding equipment to locate American units. The Ghost Army's radio operators studied real divisions, learning their communication habits. Then they simulated those patterns. They'd broadcast fake message traffic, supply requests, situation reports, orders for ammunition. They used proper radio procedure, proper encryption, proper timing. To German listeners, it sounded like the 2nd Armored Division or the 6th Armored Division had moved to a new sector. Sometimes the deception got personal. Ghost Army radio operators would impersonate specific officers. Private Eddie Rogan, a former radio announcer from Philadelphia, specialized in imitating General George Patton's distinctive voice. During one operation in September 1944, Rogan broadcast orders in Patton's voice about an imaginary attack near Metz. German intelligence intercepted the transmission and reported that Patton's Third Army was massing for an assault. In reality, Patton was 60 miles south. The Ghost Army had become a theater troupe, but the stage was a battlefield, and the audience was trying to kill them. The Ghost Army arrived in France on June 25, 1944, 19 days after D-Day. Their first mission came immediately, Operation Elephant. The U.S. 2nd Armored Division needed to move from the Normandy beachhead to a new position 20 miles east, where they would spearhead a breakout offensive. But moving 15,000 men and 400 tanks created a massive hole in the American line. German intelligence would notice. The Ghost Army's assignment: make the Germans think the 2nd Armored was still in place. On June 26th, as the real 2nd Armored moved out after dark, the Ghost Army moved in. They inflated 79 rubber Sherman tanks in the exact positions the real tanks had occupied. They positioned inflatable trucks and artillery pieces. They broadcast radio traffic using the 2nd Armored's call signs. They played recordings of tank engines and maintenance sounds. For 6 days, the deception held. German reconnaissance flights photographed the 2nd Armored positions. German artillery fired sporadically at the inflatable tanks, producing satisfying explosions that the Ghost Army artists documented with cameras. The rubber tanks couldn't shoot back, but they didn't need to. They just needed to exist long enough for the real 2nd Armored to reach their attack position undetected. On July 1st, the real 2nd Armored launched their assault from the new position, achieving complete tactical surprise. The Germans had been watching the wrong location. Operation Elephant was a success. Bernard Bluestein later recalled the moment he knew the deception worked. A German plane came over low, taking photographs. We all hit the dirt. I was lying there thinking, please don't look too close. The plane circled twice and left. That night, German artillery hit our position. They were shooting at rubber. We were 300 yards away, laughing. The Ghost Army's most ambitious deception came in late August 1944, when the U.S. A-8 Corps prepared to attack the fortress city of Brest on the Brittany Peninsula. General Troy Middleton commanded 40,000 troops, 2 full infantry divisions. But intelligence indicated the Germans expected the attack to come from a different direction. The Ghost Army was ordered to impersonate the entire 8 Corps in a position 60 miles from where the real assault would occur. On August 21st, the Ghost Army deployed everything they had. They inflated not just tanks, but entire motor pools, hundreds of trucks, jeeps, ammunition carriers, artillery batteries. They set up fake command posts with antennas and radio equipment. They painted unit insignia on inflatable vehicles. They created fake supply dumps with stacks of crates, empty wooden boxes arranged to look like ammunition. But visual deception alone wouldn't convince German intelligence. The Ghost Army needed to create activity, the kind of movement and noise that a real 40,000-man corps would generate. The solution was theater. Ghost Army soldiers put on the insignia of the 8th Corps and drove real jeeps through nearby French towns, making sure local civilians saw them. They knew German intelligence interrogated civilians and paid informants. A French shopkeeper who saw American soldiers wearing Fait Corps patches would report that information. Meanwhile, sonic half-tracks played recordings of massive convoy movements at night. Radio operators broadcast an enormous volume of message traffic, simulating the communications of 2 divisions coordinating an attack. The Ghost Army even staged fake reconnaissance patrols, sending small teams of soldiers in 8 Corps uniforms to probe German positions in the wrong area. The deception worked. German commanders reinforced their positions in the north, where they expected the 8th Corps attack. When the real assault hit Brest from the east on August 25th, German defenders were caught out of position. The city fell on September 18th after a brutal 40-day siege. But the initial assault faced lighter resistance than expected because German reinforcements had been sent to defend against a phantom army. Estimated lives saved by pulling German forces out of position: 2,000 to 4,000 American soldiers. Not every Ghost Army operation went smoothly. On March 17, 1945, as Allied forces prepared to cross the Rhine River into Germany itself, the Ghost Army was assigned to simulate the 30th Infantry Division near the town of Viersen. The real 30th was moving south to cross the Rhine at a less defended location. This was deep into German territory. The Ghost Army would be operating within 3 miles of German positions, closer than they'd ever been. And the Germans were desperate. They knew the Rhine crossing would determine the war's outcome. They were watching everything. The Ghost Army set up their usual deception: inflatable tanks, radio traffic, sonic playback. But on the second night, March 18th, German artillery began shelling their position with unprecedented accuracy. Not random harassment fire, precise targeted barrages aimed at the exact locations of the inflatable tanks. Sergeant Harold Dahl, a radio operator, wrote in his diary that night, "They're shooting at us for real this time. Shells landing 50 yards away. We can't run because that would give away the deception. We just have to sit here and hope the rubber tanks are the targets, not us." 4 Ghost Army soldiers were wounded by shrapnel that night. The inflatable tanks absorbed direct hits, deflating with loud hissing sounds. But the Ghost Army stayed in position, frantically re-inflating damaged decoys and continuing to broadcast radio traffic. Why the heavy German fire? Post-war analysis revealed that German intelligence had detected the deception, but not completely. They knew something was wrong with the 30th Division positions. The radio traffic didn't match the visual deployment. But they couldn't confirm it was fake, so they shelled the positions just to be safe, hoping to destroy whatever was there. The deception still worked. The German command kept troops near Viersen, believing the 30th Division might attack at any moment. The real 30th crossed the Rhine 15 miles south, encountering minimal resistance. Cost of the deception: 4 wounded Ghost Army soldiers, 23 destroyed inflatable tanks, 6 damaged trucks. Lives saved: an estimated 500 to 1,000 soldiers of the real 30th Division who crossed the Rhine unopposed. The Ghost Army's final operation took place in early April 1945 near the town of Buzonville in eastern France. By now, Germany was collapsing. Allied armies were advancing on all fronts. The Ghost Army's mission was to cover the movement of the 80th Infantry Division as it repositioned for a final push into southern Germany. But something had changed. After 20 operations across 11 months, the Ghost Army had become almost casual about the work. Setting up a fake division was now routine. They could inflate 100 rubber tanks in under 2 hours. The sonic deceptions ran like clockwork. On April 3rd, a young private named Jack Macy was positioning an inflatable howitzer when a German reconnaissance plane flew directly overhead at low altitude. Macy froze, expecting the plane to open fire. Instead, the plane circled once and flew away. Later that evening, Macy wrote in his diary, "The German pilot must have seen we were fake. He was too low not to notice, but he didn't shoot. Maybe he's tired of the war. Maybe he doesn't care anymore. Or maybe he just couldn't believe what he was seeing and thought his eyes were playing tricks." The truth was probably simpler. By April 1945, German intelligence was overwhelmed. The Luftwaffe barely existed. Commanders were receiving contradictory reports from every sector. Whether the tanks near Buzonville were real or fake didn't matter anymore. Germany was losing regardless. Operation Buzonville ended on April 9th. The Ghost Army packed up their equipment and moved to a rest area near Luxembourg. They had no idea they'd just completed their final mission. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The Ghost Army had performed 20 battlefield deceptions across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. They had impersonated 13 different Allied divisions. They had simulated the presence of more than 200,000 troops that didn't exist. Total casualties: 0 killed in action, 11 wounded. Losses were almost entirely from accidents, truck crashes, equipment malfunctions, not enemy fire, but the deception came at a cost. The Ghost Army couldn't celebrate their success. They couldn't tell anyone what they'd done. On July 23, 1945, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was deactivated. Every soldier signed a secrecy oath. The official records were classified top secret and buried in a warehouse in Maryland. The Ghost Army went home, and then they disappeared into silence. When Bernard Bluestein returned to Chicago in August 1945, his family asked what he'd done in the war. He couldn't tell them. The secrecy oath was explicit. No disclosure of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops mission, methods, or even existence. Violation could result in court-martial and imprisonment. So Bluestein lied. I said I'd been in a camouflage unit, which was technically true. My father asked if we'd painted tanks. I said yes. He seemed satisfied. I never mentioned the rubber. John Christman, who operated a sonic half-track, told his wife he'd been a radio operator. She assumed he'd sat in a tent sending messages. He never corrected her. For 51 years, she didn't know her husband had projected the sounds of phantom armies to terrified German soldiers. Why the secrecy? The official reason was military doctrine. Deception tactics were considered too valuable to reveal. If the Soviet Union, now a potential adversary instead of an ally, learned the specifics of American sonic and visual deception, they could develop countermeasures. The Cold War had begun before the Ghost Army even came home. But there was another reason, less official but more powerful: embarrassment. The U.S. Army had won World War II through industrial might, superior logistics, and overwhelming force. That was the narrative. Admitting that significant victories had been achieved through trickery, with balloons and sound effects, didn't fit the story American military leadership wanted to tell. So the Ghost Army was classified, not just the operational details, the entire unit's existence. For 47 years, the Ghost Army remained hidden. Then, in 1985, a veteran named Richard Syracuse started asking questions. Syracuse had served in the 603rd Camouflage Battalion. After the war, he'd become a successful commercial artist in Connecticut. In the mid-1980s, he began suffering from nightmares, vivid dreams of German artillery shells exploding near him, of inflating rubber tanks under fire. His doctor suggested talking to other veterans might help with what we'd now recognize as PTSD. But Syracuse had a problem. He couldn't find any other Ghost Army veterans. The official Army records listed the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, but provided no details. No roster, no mission descriptions, just a unit designation and deactivation date. Syracuse spent 2 years writing letters to the National Archives, to the Department of Defense, to his congressman. He wanted the records declassified so he could find the men he'd served with. In 1988, the Army finally responded. The 23rd HQ Special Troops records were still classified top secret. No explanation, no estimated declassification date, just a refusal. Syracuse didn't give up. He started searching for Ghost Army veterans the old-fashioned way, placing classified ads in newspapers. Served in 23rd HQ Special Troops 1944-45. Contact Richard Syracuse. The ads ran in papers across the country. Slowly, responses trickled in. A letter from Wisconsin, a phone call from Florida. Men who'd kept the secret for decades, now cautiously reaching out. By 1991, Syracuse had located 87 Ghost Army veterans. They formed an unofficial reunion group, meeting annually. In 1994, Syracuse's congressman, Connecticut Representative Nancy Johnson, introduced legislation requiring the Army to review the Ghost Army files for declassification. The military resisted, arguing that tactical deception methods were still sensitive. But the world had changed. The Soviet Union had collapsed in 1991. The Warsaw Pact no longer existed, and retired military historians pointed out that the British had already published books about their World War II deception operations, including detailed descriptions of inflatable tanks and sonic equipment. On May 22, 1996, 51 years and 23 days after Germany's surrender, the National Archives declassified National Archives Record Group 407, Entry 427, Box 19161, the official records of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Journalists and historians descended on the archives. What they found was astonishing. after-action reports describing each deception, photographs of inflatable tanks, technical specifications for sonic equipment, and testimonials from commanders praising the unit's effectiveness. One memo, dated June 1945 and written by General Omar Bradley, stated, "The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops performed 20 deception operations in support of tactical units. Their work undoubtedly saved countless American lives by causing the enemy to divert forces to areas where no attack materialized. This unit deserves the highest commendation, though their work must remain classified." The story finally broke publicly in 1996, with articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post, but the coverage was brief. The Ghost Army veterans were in their 70s. Many had died never telling their families the truth. The handful of survivors gave interviews, but the story didn't capture sustained national attention. It would take another 17 years for the Ghost Army to receive recognition. In 2013, filmmaker Rick Beyer released a PBS documentary titled The Ghost Army. Beyer had stumbled across the story while researching a different World War II project and became obsessed. He spent 4 years tracking down surviving veterans, by then in their late 80s and early 90s, and interviewing them on camera. The documentary featured men like Bluestein, Chrisman, and Nussenbaum, recounting their experiences. It showed archival footage of the inflatable tanks being deployed. It included interviews with military historians who explained the strategic impact of the deceptions. One historian, Dr. Jonathan Gaughan, calculated that the Ghost Army's 20 operations had collectively tied down an estimated 10 German divisions that could have been used to reinforce other sectors. If those 10 divisions had been deployed against real American advances, Gaughan said in the documentary, casualty rates would have been significantly higher. We're talking about potentially 15,000 to 30,000 additional American casualties across the European theater. The documentary won a Sen Golden Eagle Award and aired on PBS stations nationwide. Suddenly, the Ghost Army story was everywhere. Veterans started getting calls from family members who'd watched the documentary. Adult children learned for the first time what their fathers had done 70 years earlier. In 2019, Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal introduced Senate Bill 1404, the Ghost Army Congressional Gold Medal Act. The bill proposed awarding the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor Congress can bestow, to the Ghost Army veterans. The bill had bipartisan support. Republican Senator Joni Ernst, a combat veteran herself, co-sponsored it. "These men saved lives through ingenuity and courage," Ernst said during Senate floor debate. "They deserve our nation's highest recognition." But the bill moved slowly through Congress. It wasn't controversial. Nobody opposed honoring Ghost Army veterans, but it also wasn't a priority during debates over healthcare, budget, and foreign policy. Then the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020. Congressional business slowed. The bill stalled. Rick Beyer, the documentary filmmaker, had become the unofficial advocate for the Ghost Army. He'd founded the Ghost Army Legacy Project, a nonprofit dedicated to preserving the veteran stories. Beyer and his team lobbied Congress relentlessly. They organized letter-writing campaigns. They arranged for surviving veterans to testify, virtually due to COVID, before congressional committees. On February 1, 2022, nearly 3 years after the bill's introduction, President Joe Biden signed the Ghost Army Congressional Gold Medal Act into law. But by then, time had nearly run out. Of the 1,100 men who'd served in the Ghost Army, only 7 were still alive. March 21, 2024. Washington, D.C., the Capitol Rotunda. 3 of the 7 surviving Ghost Army veterans were healthy enough to attend. Bernard Bluestein, 100 years old. Seymour Nussenbaum, 100. John Chrisman, 99. They sat in wheelchairs at the front of the room. Behind them, a large screen displayed photographs from the war. Young men inflating rubber tanks in French fields, standing beside sonic half-tracks, painting camouflage onto fake artillery. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson addressed the room. For more than half a century, these men kept a secret. They couldn't share their story because their country needed them to remain silent. Today, we break that silence. We honor them not just for what they did, but for the lives they saved and the burden of secrecy they carried. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell added, military historians estimate the Ghost Army's operations saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives. That means thousands of veterans came home to their families because of what these men did. Thousands of children were born who might never have existed. The ripple effect of their service extends across generations. The medal itself is massive, 3 inches in diameter, cast in gold. One side depicts a Ghost Army soldier inflating a rubber tank. The other side bears the inscription, 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The Ghost Army, 1944-1945, Masters of Deception. When Bluestein received his medal, he held it with trembling hands and said, "I wish the other 1,097 could be here. We did this together." The ceremony concluded with a video message from President Biden. The Ghost Army teaches us that victory doesn't always come from firepower alone. Sometimes it comes from creativity, from ingenuity, from the courage to try something unprecedented. These men were artists who became warriors. They painted with deception and saved lives with illusion. America honors them today and always. As of December 2024, only 4 Ghost Army veterans remain alive. All are over 100 years old. The techniques the Ghost Army pioneered are still used today. In 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, the U.S. military deployed inflatable decoys to deceive Iraqi forces about the location of the main assault into Kuwait. In 2003, during the invasion of Iraq, American units used electronic warfare to broadcast fake radio traffic, creating the illusion of armored divisions where none existed. The Ghost Army's sonic deception has evolved into sophisticated psychological operations. Modern militaries use directed sound systems that can project voice recordings or other audio over several miles, creating confusion about troop movements. Even the inflatable technology has improved. Today's military decoys are made from radar-reflective materials that fool not just human observers, but also electronic detection systems. An inflatable tank can produce a radar signature nearly identical to a real one, but the core principle remains unchanged. Make the enemy see what isn't there, hear what isn't real, and respond to threats that don't exist. One unexpected legacy of the Ghost Army is artistic. Many of the soldiers continued creating art during the war. They sketched the French countryside, painted portraits of fellow soldiers, and documented their experiences in drawings and watercolors. Ellsworth Kelly, who would become one of America's most important abstract artists, later said that his time in the Ghost Army influenced his approach to perception and illusion. "We were manipulating how people saw things," Kelly explained in a 1992 interview. "That's what all art does in a way. We make people see differently." In 2015, a collection of Ghost Army artwork went on exhibit at the Pratt Institute in New York. The paintings show inflatable tanks being positioned in fields, French villages at dusk, German prisoners being marched past fake artillery. They're beautiful and surreal. War documented by men who understood that reality is negotiable. The Ghost Army raises an uncomfortable question. How much of what we think we know about World War II is true? If 100 men with rubber tanks could convince German intelligence that entire divisions were present when they weren't, what else was fabricated? How many decisive battles were won, not through superior tactics, but through deception we still don't know about? The Ghost Army's records were classified for 51 years. Other World War II deception operations remain classified to this day. British intelligence files on some operations won't be fully declassified until 2045. 100 years after the war ended, we celebrate the truth of the Ghost Army now. But we should remember, for 5 decades, this truth didn't officially exist. The men who lived it couldn't speak it. The documents that proved it were locked away. What else is locked away? What other ghost armies existed that we haven't discovered yet? And how long will we wait before the whole truth of World War II finally emerges from the archives? The Ghost Army performed 20 deception operations between June 1944 and April 1945. They impersonated 13 different American divisions. They saved an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 lives. They did it with inflatable tanks that cost $85 each, loudspeakers playing recordings, and radio operators broadcasting fake messages. They did it without firing a shot. Of the 1,100 men who served in the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, only 4 remain alive as of December 2024. Their story was classified for 51 years. Now it's declassified. Now you know. If you want to learn more about other secret World War II operations that remained hidden for decades, check out our video on Operation Mincemeat, the British deception that used a dead man to fool Hitler. Remember the Ghost Army. Remember what ordinary people can do when creativity becomes their weapon.